All rise. Circuit Court of Fairfax County is now in session. The Honorable Penny Estes presiding. Please be seated from the room.
All right, good morning. All right, if I could have council approach for a moment, please. put my microphone on. Sorry, Judy. Are you ready for the jury? Yes. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, ma'am. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Dr. Hughes, if you can come back to the stand for me, please. All right. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Hughes. I'm Wayne Dennison. We haven't met before.
No, good morning.
Good morning. You testified yesterday that you have to give careful attention to gendered stereotypes, correct?
That is correct.
When you're talking about intimate partner violence, you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes. And during your testimony, you in fact paid attention to gendered stereotypes, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you said we were going to have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes, and then you testified at length where you referenced both men and women. You paid attention to those stereotypes during the course of your testimony, correct?
What I was saying was you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes when you're conducting these evaluations. You can't assume all the time that the male is the perpetrator and the female is the victim. You have to go into the evaluation understanding that the male also could be the victim of intimate partner violence.
In fact, you're aware that there are large-scale studies that do say that IPV towards males does exist.
Of course.
Okay. And every time you referred to the characteristic of a victim of intimate partner violence yesterday, you used the pronouns she or her, didn't you?
I was using the she and her pronouns in this case because my determination was, as I stated, that Ms. Heard was the victim of intimate partner violence. That is why I was using the she, her pronouns.
You, in fact, said women gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. That's what you said. The woman gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. And then you say difficult for victim to extricate herself. You go on to say that she can and she should. Over and over, you use she, right?
I believe in this case I did because I was referencing this case where I found Ms. Heard to be the victim of intimate partner violence. It doesn't mean that men don't get into the relationships for all the right reasons too. I believe they do.
Nearly every time you referenced the perpetrator of IPV, you used he or him, didn't you?
And it goes back to the same reasoning as I'm describing my understanding and my evaluation in this matter. Of course, men can be perpetrators and victims of intimate partner violence. That's well established in the research, and that's well established in my clinical practice as well.
Isn't the reason that you used the pronouns that you did that you almost always testify on behalf of a woman?
That's not correct.
You don't even remember the last time you testified on behalf of a man.
Well, I don't testify on behalf of someone. I testify as to the results of my evaluation. I frequently treat and assess male victims of childhood sexual abuse who are coming into treatment for abuse by their Boy Scout leader, by their coach, by their teacher, by a trusted adult. I see them in therapy. I see them in forensic matters, in criminal cases. So I treat and evaluate men all the time.
I didn't ask you about treatment. I asked you about testimony. You broke out your practice between treatment and testimony. I'm not asking about treatment. When's the last time you testified on behalf of a man?
I testified recently in a deposition on behalf of a man who was traumatized because he was wrongly convicted.
At the time of your deposition 6 weeks ago, you couldn't remember a single time you had testified on behalf of a man.
I testified in my deposition that I testified in a case of a man who was wrongly convicted about 20 years and suffered physical and sexual violence in prison, and I detailed the traumatic effects of that happened on that gentleman.
All right. Why don't we take a look at your deposition?
Sure.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Transcript of the deposition that you gave March 28th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
All right. Let's go to page 77. Let's look at page 78, line 8. So you can't recall a single instance where you were hired by the attorney representing the male in an IPV matter, correct?
In an IPV matter, not in a trauma matter or a child sexual abuse matter.
Okay, so that's the distinction. You don't have any recollection of ever testifying on behalf of a male in an IPV matter.
As I stated yesterday, the very first case that I testified in was in a same-sex intimate partner violence where the man was the victim of another man. I routinely treat and assess same-sex couples where then the female can be the perpetrator of another female, and the male can be the perpetrator or a victim of his partner.
So let me get this. You testified in a case where one male is alleged to have engaged in IPV against another male.
Correct.
All right. Okay. But that's the only one you remember. That's the only one you remember.
No, I've done this frequently. As you well know, most cases don't go to trial. I've worked on hundreds and hundreds of cases. You've limited it to testimony. Many cases don't come to trial, but I've issued reports and worked on many cases of same-sex intimate partner violence where men are the victims.
But I did ask you about testimony, and I limited the question to testimony, and the only testimony that you remember is the same-sex couple, right?
There were multiple same-sex couples, I believe, that I testified
That you testified in court at trial.
I believe so, yes.
All right, but you didn't remember that in March.
I did remember that in March.
Okay. You're a professional witness, correct?
That's not correct.
No? You make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying in court, correct?
Not testifying in court. I conduct thorough, comprehensive psychological evaluations of individuals who are involved in a court case. The majority of those cases never show up in a courtroom. And half of my practice and half of my income is about my clinical work with people who are coming to me for therapy.
I didn't ask you about the other half of your income. I'm asking you whether you made hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying as an expert witness in court.
As you're phrasing that question, that's not correct. That would be the amount of income that I generate from my forensic practice. I testify perhaps maybe once or twice a year. Most of the work is done behind the scenes in evaluating individuals and issuing reports.
But you'll agree with me that a big part of that practice is providing expert witness testimony.
That's not correct.
No? That's not a big part of your practice.
If I testify twice a year, that's not a big part of my practice. All the other time is doing the work for the cases and evaluating the individuals and issuing reports.
All right. What percentage of work do you devote to forensic psychology?
As I stated yesterday, I say half and half clinical, half forensic, but I also have a substantial amount of time that I use in the professional activities and serving on professional boards.
So what portion of your practice do you provide expert witness services?
I think you're using the expert witness services synonymous with the forensic psychology part of the practice. So the forensic psychology practice, what I do here today is one part of it, and it's a smaller part as opposed to all of the evaluations and individuals that I'm assessing.
Your practice is successful enough that you maintain your offices on Madison Avenue in New York, correctly?
Correct. I've had that office since 2005.
Right. And you're sufficiently successful at your forensic work that you're able to perform unpaid work at a hospital, correct?
Correct, and I also do pro bono work as well.
There. In fact, you actually instruct others on the use of expert testimony in court cases, correct?
On the use and understanding trauma and violence abuse in the courtroom and how to, for advocates and people who could not have this level of training or experience, how to come into the courtroom and talk about very difficult issues of domestic violence, yes.
All right. Can we pull up PX 1241? Do you recognize that document?
Yes, it looks like the front page of a PowerPoint presentation.
And it's a PowerPoint presentation given by whom?
By myself and Mary Ann Dutton, who is a very well-known and respected researcher and clinician in the area of domestic violence.
And what's the topic of the PowerPoint that you're giving?
Expert witness testimony in cases involving domestic violence.
Okay. And who did you give this presentation to?
That was to the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women. That is an organization that provides legal services to women who have assaulted or killed their partners in self-defense, and mostly people who these individuals, the women who they've seen in treatment are through shelter-based programs or through advocates, and those are individuals who don't really know how to come into the courtroom and talk, and that's what this presentation and training was for.
I'm going to move PX 1241 into evidence.
Any objection? No. All right, 1241 in evidence. Do you want it published or?
Yes, let's publish it to the jury. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Why don't we pull up PX 1242? Do you recognize this document?
Yes, this also looks like a PowerPoint presentation that I gave.
All right. And what is the name of this PowerPoint presentation?
This is called The Use of Psychological Experts in Cases of Domestic Violence. It was presented to the Kings County Bar Association, which is in Brooklyn. And what this presentation talked about was some of the things that I talked to you all about yesterday, the myths and misconceptions in intimate partner violence, when women use force, what happens if they drop protective orders, how they present in court, and that's what this presentation was to attorneys at the Bar Association.
Okay, but this is another presentation that you gave as to the use of psychological experts, and you gave it to a bar association.
Right, they were prosecutors and defense attorneys in attendance at that bar
Right.
association.
At your deposition, you testified that you were going to be paid $100 an hour for your time in this case.
I did not testify to that.
You did not?
That's an error in the transcript.
Oh, that's not right.
That's correct.
So, and you corrected the transcript?
We did not do an errata in the transcript at this point.
So you knew there was an error in the transcript, but you didn't fix it?
There were several errors in the transcript.
But you didn't fix any of them?
There was no time to fix them, that's correct.
All right. So you're not being paid $100 an hour. How much are you getting paid?
I'm being paid $500 an hour.
$500 an hour. And that's what, and that's the bill you sent for your deposition, right? $500 an hour.
Correct.
Right. You submitted a number of disclosures in this case. You have not formed an opinion as to whether Mr. Depp committed intimate partner violence against Ms. Heard, correct?
Correct. I formed the opinion that Ms. Heard's report of the intimate partner violence is consistent with what we know in the literature about intimate partner violence.
You have a limited role here comparing individual data to group data and then just determining whether it's consistent, right?
I wouldn't say it's a limited role, but that's generally correct.
You wouldn't use the word limited role?
A limited role in terms of how we go about a forensic evaluation,
you
not
know
a limited role in this case.
Do you remember whether you used limited role in your deposition?
I don't. If you have it in front of me, you probably think I did, but sure.
And you have no independent knowledge of the facts underlying the alleged abuse, correct?
I have the knowledge of the plethora of documents that I've reviewed in this case.
No, I'm asking you your independent firsthand knowledge. You have none of that, right?
You mean whether I was there?
Yeah, you weren't there.
Of course not.
Okay. And you're not testifying to the veracity, the truthfulness of any of the allegations.
Correct. I'm testifying to the consistency of the data points of all the different documents, including the psychological testing and the clinical evaluation that I conducted of Ms. Heard, and how that comports with the therapy records and all the other documents and the photos and texts that I reviewed.
And you have no personal knowledge of any abuse.
Correct, personally. Correct.
Right. And all you know is what Ms. Heard self-reported to you and others.
That's not correct.
Because you did collateral interviews?
And I reviewed medical records, and I reviewed other witness statements of what they witnessed and what they saw.
And all of those statements that you reviewed, those were statements that started with Ms. Heard, correct?
Not necessarily.
Well, the medical records did, didn't they?
Well, the medical records, if she's self-reporting what happened to her, sure. I mean, that's what we do when we go to a physician. We say, I have a headache. We're self-reporting our difficulties.
Yeah. Everything Ms. Heard reported directly to you was after she was sued by Mr. Depp in this case, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't meet Ms. Heard until, what, September 2019?
That was the first evaluation appointment, correct.
How'd you get engaged?
Engaged?
How'd you get hired to do this work?
I was contacted by the legal team.
Or were you interviewed by her legal team as to whether you were going to testify here?
I was not.
You were not interviewed.
I was not.
You were contacted.
Correct.
Had you worked with that legal team before?
I had.
Yeah. So they already knew who you were, right?
Correct.
Right. And at any time that you were working with Ms. Heard or assessing Ms. Heard, she could have chose to fire you, correct?
I suppose her legal team could have chose to fire her. I was not her. She is not my client. The legal team is the one who hires me. I am responsible to the legal team, not Ms. Hurd.
And the legal team that hired you already knew who you were because you worked together previously.
And clearly they knew of my expertise in this area of intimate partner violence and traumatic stress, which is why they contacted me to work on this matter.
All right, several times yesterday you used language about assessing Ms. Hurd's relationship with Mr. Depp. Do you remember talking about that?
Sure.
You can't assess a relationship without talking to both parties, can you?
You certainly can get a lot of information from one party, absolutely.
But
And especially when it's buttressed by other documents, including 4 years of therapy records and couples therapy records, you can get a lot of information based on those documents and that contemporaneous reports of the relationship.
Respectfully, I didn't ask whether you get a lot of information. I asked whether you can assess a relationship without talking to both parties.
I believe you can. There are certainly limitations inherent in that, but you certainly can.
You talked to Ms. Hurd for, what, approximately 30 hours, right?
Correct.
How long you spent with Mr. Depp?
I did not spend any time with Mr. Depp. It was my understanding that he did not sit for a psychological evaluation.
Right. In fact, you never met Mr. Depp, have you?
I have not.
But you purport to be able to assess the relationship between Mr. Depp and Ms. Hurd?
But I also read Mr. Depp's transcripts of his testimony. I watched his deposition testimony. I reviewed his medical records. I reviewed his text messages. So it's not necessarily totally blind. I did have information, although I'm not making a conclusion about Mr. Depp himself.
Is the standard now not necessarily totally blind? That's how you assess the relationship? If it's not necessarily totally blind, I can assess it?
No, we assess as clinical psychologists relationships all the time. That's what we're trained to do. Certainly someone who's been trained in intimate partner violence to understand and look for the dynamics that happen in that relationship. And then when we have external data that supports what the individual is telling us, way before this legal case even came on the scene, that becomes very strong data to support that conclusion.
Let's talk about some of that data.
Sure.
All right? You chose to conduct some collateral interviews.
Correct.
Right? And you interviewed Dr. Bonnie Jacobs.
Correct.
And you looked at her notes.
Correct.
And you know that Miss Jacobs, Dr. Jacobs, doesn't know anything about the version of what happened in Australia until Miss Hurd had already been sued, correct?
I believe she was not in treatment with Dr. Jacobs at the time the Australia incident occurred, so that would be correct. She did reach out to Dr. Connell Cohen about Australia, who she was treating with at that time contemporaneously.
All right, I'll ask you about Dr. Cohen. We'll get there. All right. So, you know that Ms. Hurd stopped seeing Dr. Jacobs in August 2014.
That's correct.
And she didn't go back until after she got sued, right?
I believe that's the date. I'd have to look to make sure, but I believe that you're correct.
Yeah. And you said you reviewed you interviewed Dr. Connell Cohen.
That's correct.
And you also reviewed his deposition testimony.
That's correct.
And you know that he testified that when he was treating a patient, he assumes the patient is telling the truth, correct?
I believe he said something to that effect in his deposition.
And
if he has no reason to believe otherwise, if there's no other data to believe otherwise, that your patient's not being totally honest with you, then you believe what they're saying.
Right. No other data to believe otherwise, but the sole thing that's happening is Ms. Hurd is talking to Mr. Cohen, or Dr. Cohen.
I wouldn't say she's talking to him. She's going to him for therapy, and he's using his clinical psychological expertise to understand the connection between her symptoms and what she's reporting, what's going on in her life.
All right. But you understand that he testified that he assumes the patient is telling the truth.
Again, I understand that statement in his testimony. I have a lot more rich information of having spoken to him for 2 hours and reviewing his clinical notes.
He testified he was making a leap of faith with respect to that, right? With respect to the truthfulness.
Again, that was not my understanding of speaking with him and reviewing his notes. I'm aware he testified something to that effect.
All right. And you testified yesterday that Dr. Cohen never diagnosed Ms. Heard with any personality disorders. You remember that?
Yes.
In fact, Dr. Cohen's deposition testimony reflects the fact that he doesn't make diagnoses, correct?
Correct. And I asked him specifically, did he have any indications that even if he doesn't, as his practice, use them, does she meet criteria for a personality disorder? And he told me she did not.
All right. So you asked him specifically with respect to a topic that you haven't disclosed in your expert report, and then he made a conclusion that's reflected in no document.
It's reflected in my notes. It's reflected in his notes about what he's treating. He's treating the symptoms. He's not focusing on the diagnosis, but he is treating the symptoms.
You talked about Dr. Cohen's concern for Ms. Heard's safety.
Correct.
He wasn't talking about her physical safety, was he?
Yes, he was.
No, he was talking about her emotional safety. Wasn't that what he was talking about?
He was concerned for both.
Okay. Did Dr. Cohen testify that he never had the feeling that Johnny intended to hurt Ms. Heard?
I believe he said that. I mean, he talked about Mr. Depp being very poorly controlled, and that's what made him, Dr. Cohen, concerned, because in those moments when he was not controlled, that he could accidentally seriously hurt Ms. Heard.
Let's do this again. Ms. Heard told Dr. Cohen that Mr. Depp was poorly controlled, correct?
That's not correct.
Okay. He determined that from the treatment he was providing Ms. Heard.
And he also had a couple session with Mr. Depp, and he also had correspondence with Dr. Kipper. So he had other information as to Mr. Depp's functioning.
All right, you talked about Dr. Banks.
Correct.
Dr. Banks was doing relationship consulting, right? Consultation and relationship.
Correct.
And Dr. Banks only met with them once.
Correct.
All right. And you did an interview, I think, with Ms. Heard's mother, Paige.
That's correct.
All right. You'd agree with me that a person's family member is not the most objective source of information?
Sometimes you have to certainly control for that the person may be wanting to be protective of their daughter, of course.
And you interviewed Ms. Paige Heard after Mr. Depp had already sued Amber Heard.
Right. The entirety of my work in this case happened, obviously, after the lawsuit.
Did you review, in that context, any of Paige Heard's text messages with Mr. Depp?
I'm not sure if I saw them with Mr. Depp. I do believe I saw some with Ms. Heard. I mean, Miss Paige Heard, Amber Heard's mother, did talk to me about her relationship with Mr. Depp.
And she told you that she loved Johnny even after Amber alleged abuse, correct?
She did.
All right. Now, you testified that you approach a forensic evaluation with, I think you said it again today, a healthy degree of skepticism.
Correct.
All right. This skepticism didn't cause you to conduct interviews with, for instance, Laurel Anderson.
Right, I did not speak to Dr. Laurel Anderson.
And you chose not to speak to Dr. Laurel Anderson because you disagreed with Dr. Laurel Anderson?
That's not correct.
All right. What did Dr. Laurel Anderson do on behalf of Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp?
She was a couples therapist that they sought. They had 4 couples sessions. As I stated yesterday, one of them in which Mr. Depp stormed out of. She did have a long, I guess, evaluation or interview with Mr. Depp individually and with Ms. Heard individually. And then she saw them intermittently after the May 21st, 2016 incident, and when they were filing for divorce.
So you didn't interview Laurel Anderson, but you know what she did. How'd you figure that out?
Because we had her redacted notes and her deposition.
All right. And you understood from her deposition that Dr. Anderson didn't believe Ms. Heard to be a victim of spousal abuse?
I believe those were her words, yes.
And you also understood from her deposition that Mr. Depp had not had a very long history of being violent with any of his wife or women.
That she said that as well.
Yeah.
But that's something about Ms. Heard significantly triggered him. She talked about that as well.
And Dr. Anderson thought that Mr. Depp had been, her words, well controlled, I think for almost 20 or 30 years, correct?
Up until this point, I believe she said.
Right. I know that you testified that you reviewed medical records.
Yes.
All right. So, you know Ms. Heard had a personal nurse.
Correct.
Erin Filati.
Correct.
You didn't interview Ms. Filati either.
I did not.
You know she spent time with Ms. Heard on a regular basis during her relationship with Mr. Depp.
Correct. I had her clinical notes that I reviewed.
Right. And you reviewed her deposition testimony.
Correct.
Some of which the jury's heard, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. And you reviewed the nursing notes.
Yes.
So you know that Ms. Heard admitted to a history of eating disorders to Ms. Filati, correct?
I know that's in the notes. That's nowhere else in any other record, so I'm not sure where that came from.
But you relied on everybody else's notes.
And there are some things that I disagreed with, like I disagree with Dr. Laurel Anderson about it being mutual abuse.
Right. So the stuff you disagree with, you disregard, and the rest you keep, correct?
That's not correct.
But that's what you did.
That's not correct.
All right. You know that Ms. Filati saw Ms. Heard immediately after she returned from Australia.
I'd have to look at the notes again to be sure, but I know she did see her when she came back from Australia. That's correct.
Did Ms. Filati document any injuries to Ms. Heard in her notes?
I did not see that in the record.
Okay, so you looked at her notes, and there's no injury to Ms. Heard documented in her nurse's notes following her return from Australia?
Correct.
Okay. You talked about this concept, which you then defined, lethality. And you testified there are certain factors of their present relationship where a woman ends up murdered by her partner.
Correct.
And that's one of the ways you look as to whether a woman is in a very dangerous situation.
Correct.
Can we pull up PX92? So
It's an evidence.
Published to the jury.
Yeah, it will be published.
Do you know what this is?
I believe this is the knife that Miss Heard gave to Mr. Depp as a gift.
All right. And you speak Spanish?
Un poquito?
Do you know what it says?
Yes, it says hasta la muerta, until death.
So a woman you suggest has characteristics of being afraid for her life, gives her intimate partner a large knife, which she has inscribed until death. That's your testimony?
Well, there's context.
Okay. We can do that later. So we talked about, you talked a little bit about Mr. Depp purporting to demonstrate jealousy with Ms. Heard. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And you specifically talked about Mr. Depp displaying jealousy regarding the actor James Franco.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, the very first time you met with Ms. Heard, she talked to you about Mr. Franco, James Franco, correct?
I don't know if it was the first time, but I did ask about some other relationships.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Let's go PX 1246. I just want to go to the first page. All right. So, do you recognize the document that's in front of you?
Yes.
All right. And what I would like to do, what is it?
It's a top sheet of a background information questionnaire that I use to help guide the evaluation.
Okay. So, now, this is, who filled it out?
I filled it out,
Whose form is it?
my form.
All right. I'm going to move just the first page into evidence because we're going to talk about other portions of it later.
Could you back us so she can see the whole first page? Any objection?
I want the whole thing.
Okay, I can't.
We will admit the whole thing into evidence.
You want the whole thing in evidence?
Sure.
I have no objection whatsoever.
All right, 1246 in evidence in full. Okay. Are there any identifiers that need, or we're just going?
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some.
All right.
Probably.
Okay, so you owe me a redacted one, correct?
Don't know what the nature of the redactions are going to be, but
Okay, well, you
Yeah.
can discuss it.
We'll work with
Okay,
them on that.
thank you.
But I'm
All right.
positive there's identifiers on there.
all right. 1246 has been moved into evidence. Can we blow up the bottom right-hand corner?
All right, you want to publish to the jury?
Yeah, let's publish it to the jury.
I'm not comfortable publishing to the jury if there's identifiers.
I don't.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it at a break to make sure that we.
Well, we can, well, why don't you,
I don't see anything on the first page.
if you want to look at that, any objection to that? Well, that's what they're going to show. right
That's
now.
what we're going to show.
All right, publish then.
All right. All right. So this is the bottom corner, your notes. And it's under the section of your notes that's entitled Intimate Relationships.
Correct.
Right. And one of the notes here on the right, it says JF, that's James Franco, right?
Correct.
Got close but really wanted to be with Johnny.
Well, it says JF friends. They were friends.
All right. Said friends, but you put him under intimate relationship.
Well, there's a line there because I was asking specifically about other things that were allegations in this matter.
There's a line there because you did not believe that they should go under intimate relationships, but it's on your form?
She wasn't telling me that this was an intimate relationship. I queried as to what's going on with James Franco because that was something that was raised in this case.
And there's a note for December 2015.
When they became more friends, more friendly.
Right. And that was a period of time in which Ms. Heard was married to Mr. Dent, correct?
Correct.
So she became close with Mr. Franco in December 2015, and at least you put it under intimate relationships.
With a line differentiating another part of this document.
Okay. Did you provide another header, like a header that says friends?
No.
No. Well, let's look at the next one. The next one says, I think it says Elon.
Correct.
It's Elon Musk, right?
Correct.
All right. May 2016.
Correct.
Met Ball.
Correct.
That's a big fancy party in New York, right?
Yes, it is.
All right. And she says she dated him after Johnny.
Correct.
She met Elon Musk in May 2016 when she filed the TRO.
The last answer was May 21st. I believe it was May 26th, 27th. I'm correct?
When did she start dating Elon Musk?
Sometime after that.
All right. Yeah, sometime after the TRO?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. We can take that down. You talked quite a lot yesterday about this concept of reactive violence.
Yes.
Yeah. Just so I understand your position on this, is it your position that if Miss Heard was abused, she gets to hit Mr. Depp?
That's not my opinion.
But you know she hits him, right?
And I testified to that.
Right. And how many times do you believe that she told you that she hit him?
Do I believe that she told me, or how many instances were there?
Well, I don't know. How would you know other than her telling you? You weren't there, right?
I was not there, that's correct.
All right. How many times did she admit to hitting him?
She indicated a number of times in a number of instances.
You indicated that you had listened to audio recordings as part of the work you did in this case?
That's correct.
All right. I'd like to play you a portion of one of those recordings. It's Plaintiff's Exhibit 343. It's already in evidence. And for the record, the portion I want to play is 2 minutes 46, 246.01 to 247.20.
I said to Travis, I said to you, hey, tell Travis what just happened.
Oh, you told me to do it. You told me to. You said, go do that.
I said, no, tell him what just happened.
And I lied.
And that you punched me in the
You're right.
fucking thing. And
You figured
in
it
the
out.
face. And you said, no, fucking, no, I didn't. What the fuck are you talking about? And I watched you lie. And then
I didn't punch you, by the way. I'm sorry that I didn't hit you across the face in a proper slap, but I was hitting you. It was not punching you. Babe, you're not punched.
Don't tell me what it feels like to be punched.
You know, you've been in a lot of fights, been around a long time. I know. Yeah.
No, when you fucking have a close
You
face.
didn't get punched. You got hit. I'm sorry I hit you like this, but I did not punch you. I did not fucking deck you. I fucking was hitting you. I don't know what the motion of my actual hand was, but you're fine. I did not hurt you. I did not punch you. I was hitting you.
How are you talking?
What am I supposed to do? Do this? I'm not sitting here bitching about it, am I? You are. That's the difference between me and you. You're a fucking baby.
Because you started.
You are such a baby. Grow the fuck up,
Because you
Johnny.
started physical fights.
I did start a physical
Yeah,
fight.
you did. So I had to get
Because
the fuck out of there.
yes, you did. So you did the right thing, the big thing. You know what? You are admirable.
You agree with Ms. Heard that it's admirable to retreat from a fight?
Is it admirable? It is admirable to retreat from a fight.
Yeah. Anything about this tape suggest to you that it's characteristic of reactive violence?
In this instance, if true, if she said she hit him first, then that would not be reactive violence.
All right. You testified that Ms. Heard reported to you that she engaged in low levels of violence, correct?
Well, I don't think she said that. I think that was the characterization of knowing the types of minor and severe levels of violence.
Okay, I got it wrong. You consider low levels of violence.
Well, I considered what the literature and the research talks about low levels of violence as opposed to severe levels of violence.
And I think you suggested that Ms. Heard sustained more severe injuries, correct?
I think I said more frequent injuries.
More frequent, but not more severe.
Well, certainly the incidents in Australia and the sexual violence and the incidents on December 15th, 2015 were quite severe.
You said you reviewed medical records in rendering your opinion.
Correct.
And you reviewed photographs.
Correct.
Now, other than the reports to her therapists, which you call medical records, right?
Yeah, I would call those medical records,
Right.
sure.
Other than the reports to her therapist, there's not a single medical record that reflects any injury to Ms. Heard, is there?
That's not correct.
No. There is not other than what doctor reflected injuries to Ms. Heard?
The note by Erin Borum, her married name, Falat, I'm not recalling her married name, indicated that she was headbutted by Mr. Depp and that she went for a concussion check and she had a busted lip, and then she went to Dr. Kipper's office in order to get checked.
What? And there's a medical record other than that note that reflects it?
There's a note that she showed up at Dr. Kipper's office. There's a note in the
But there's
similar 2
nothing from
days that
Dr. Kipper,
Dr.
is there?
Laurel Anderson saw the 2 bruises from that same incident as well.
All right. You reviewed photographs.
Yes.
All right. I'd like to put up PX 144. It's been published to the jury briefly. I'm going to keep it up very briefly. That photograph doesn't reflect a low level of violence, does it?
Well, that reflects a severe injury, I would agree.
Yeah. Why don't we go to PX 145? That's a severe injury that ended up with Mr. Depp on a gurney, correct?
That is a severe injury, correct.
Yeah. All right. Is it your testimony that throwing a can of mineral spirits at your spouse is characteristic of reactive violence?
If you are running away from your spouse who is trying to hurt you, yes.
All right. So you can throw a can of mineral spirits. What about if you throw a can of Red Bull?
Again, it depends on the incident I think that you're referring to. That was not necessarily reactive violence. That was in a state of frustration or anger.
All right. So when you throw a can of Red Bull in a state of frustration or anger, that's not reactive violence?
No.
All right. What about if you throw a bottle of vodka because your husband fell off the wagon? Is that reactive violence?
Are you asking me hypothetically?
I'm asking you, would that be a characteristic of reactive violence? Throw a bottle of vodka because your husband fell off the wagon.
If it's in the middle of an assault, perhaps. If it's independent of that, no.
Right. So, for instance, if your husband was just having a couple of shots at the bar.
Again, you would need more information and context to make that determination.
All right. You don't think that's a reflective of reactive violence? And you'll agree with me that when you throw the second bottle, that's not reactive violence.
If somebody's throwing multiple bottles, again, psychological violence and abuse is psychologically destabilizing, which destabilizes individuals' coping strategies. That is absolutely true.
Lost what's true. Is it your testimony that once you've thrown one bottle and missed, when you throw the second one, now it's reactive violence?
That's not what I'm saying. I don't think throwing bottles is acceptable in any context.
All right. All right. I'm going to ask you about some of the testing that you did. One of the things that you did was a form looked like called a CTS2 relationship behaviors form.
The conflict tactics scale, correct.
So CTS2 stands for conflict tactics scale.
That's correct.
And this is one of the documents that you had with you on the stand yesterday.
I had all my testing with me and all my clinical notes from my evaluation with Ms. Hurd.
And you gave me a copy of it because you looked at it during your testimony.
Because you asked me, so I gave it to you, yes.
Right. All right. But you have a good recollection of what that test is about, the CTS2 test.
I have a very good memory and a very good recollection. I want to give the jury the most accurate and thorough information. After having done 12 tests with so many questions, I wanted to just be as accurate as possible. I'm sure my memory would miss some things that might be relevant.
All right, so let's talk about the CTS-2. It's dated 9/26/2019.
Correct.
All right, 9/26/2019. And it goes through and it asks a whole series of questions about what you've done and what your partner has done.
That's correct.
There's tons of these questions.
Correct.
And every single one of those questions is preceded by the same question, right? How often did this happen in the past year?
Correct.
You knew that as of 9/26/2019, not a single one of the things that Ms. Heard identified happened to her in the last year.
Correct.
Right.
She was oriented to a different time frame to get a checklist of those behaviors.
Right. And one of the although it says, please, how often did this happen in the past year? One of the questions is, my partner used force to make me have oral or anal sex.
Correct.
She went with 0 on that, right?
I'd have to see if you'd like to show me.
Right. Do you have any recollection that she didn't go with 0 on that?
I have a recollection at that point in time, she was framing those type of acts as angry sex.
Right.
She
And you
wasn't
helped her-
framing them as physical force, as most women don't on these measures.
And you helped her to reframe it as something other than angry sex, didn't you, doctor?
My job was not to do treatment. My job was to do an evaluation, and that's what I did.
All right. So you did an evaluation, and one of the evaluations you did and one of the diagnoses that you ultimately made relates to PTSD.
That is correct.
All right. And you diagnosed Amber Heard with PTSD long before you made use of the gold standard test for PTSD.
That is correct.
All right.
And I make the diagnosis of PTSD in my clinical practice without using the CAPS all the time.
All right. So just so that you and I are on the same page, and I think we are, this gold standard test that I'm referring to is the CAPS-5.
That is correct.
That's the one that Dr. Curry administered, correct?
Correct.
All right. You didn't administer the CAP-5 until after you'd already diagnosed Amber Heard with PTSD, right?
She had PTSD in 2019. She had PTSD in the beginning of 2021 when I evaluated her. And then she had PTSD in December 27th, 2021 when I administered the CAPS. That's correct.
All right. I think I asked a much more narrow question than that. You didn't diagnose, you didn't give the CAPS-5. Hold on, I'm going to strike that question altogether and start it again. You had already diagnosed her with PTSD before you did the gold standard, correct?
Before I administered the CAPS-5, there was enough data in the psychological testing and my clinical evaluation to establish that she met criteria for PTSD. That is correct.
You submitted an expert disclosure in this case on January 11th, 2022.
I believe the attorney submitted that disclosure, yes.
You participated in that?
In the January 11th, it was the same disclosure that went before. There were no changes on that.
Did you reference the CAPS-5 in that at all?
I don't believe I gave the results of the CAPS-5 to the attorneys at that point.
All right. You met with, I got dates here. This time I'm using the cheat sheet. All right. You met with Amber Heard on September 26, 2019.
I would love to have my cheat sheet, but I'll take your word for it.
I'll share.
Thank you.
October 11, 2019. When did you give the CAPS 5?
The CAPS 5 was administered the last time that I saw Ms. Hurd. I saw her over, as stated multiple times, over the past 2.5 years, and having not seen her in about a year to get an accurate assessment of her current symptoms, having had all the background information.
You got it? Well, good afternoon. Before I begin, let me tell you, I'll be around to answer questions on a lot of things, but I got 600 Olympians waiting out there for me. If you keep me too long, they'll rush the place, and all kidding aside.
Your copy of it.
Thank you.
That's fine.
I'd like to go to the second page. And, can we put up the second page?
Are you putting the second page into evidence?
Not yet.
Then I can't put it up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like the witness to see the second.
The witness can see the second page.
Thank you. This is the second page. This is instructions on how you do it.
Correct.
All right. And then we'll go to the third page. Let's let the witness see the third page. Now, this is entitled scoring.
Correct.
So when you score, you look at two things, right? You look at frequency and intensity.
Correct.
All right. Those are the two factors you use to score.
Correct.
All right. Can we go to the fourth page of this document and just show it to the witness? All right. So, Dr. Hughes, this is the first page of the CAPS B where, other than the identifying information, where there's any input into the document, correct?
The CAPS 5, you said the CAPS B?
Yeah, I misspoke.
Okay. Yes. This is the criterion A, which means that in order to, as I said yesterday, to obtain a diagnosis of PTSD, you have to have sustained a very specific traumatic event. That's the first gate to get through the door.
All right. So, Your Honor, I'm going to, I'd like to be able to get them a copy of this. Is it too early to take the break, or?
A little bit, if you
All
can.
right, I can do something else.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. All right. So, do you recognize the first page or the fourth page of this document?
Yes, I do.
And the handwriting on the fourth page is yours?
It's all my handwriting.
All right. The entirety of it is yours. I'm going to move this document into evidence along with the first page. And that one is what number? think it is
You're still on 1247.
1247.
Okay, so you want to move the entirety of 1247 in.
Yes.
Do you have a copy of 1247? It's Exhibit 1247?
I don't have the whole page in front of me.
Well, I mean, do you have plaintiff's exhibits 1247? Plaintiff's 1247. I don't have it either.
Oh, it's defendants 1435.
1435. Defendants 1435.
I'll try to go as quickly as possible.
Take your time.
Did you want to take a look at the court's copy? Would that be easier for you?
It's 59 pages. What is he moving in? I mean, I don't think
I
we
think
can
he's
do a
moving
partial.
are you moving the entire document in?
Yeah, I'm going to move the entire document into evidence.
I don't think I have an objection to that.
No objection?
No
Did you want to
objection.
take a look at the court's copy, or you're good?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. My apologies, sir.
That's fine. Thank you, Jamie.
It's going to show the evaluation too, right? No objection, no.
All right, so even though I pulled it from defendants 1435, we want to make this 1247 plaintiffs, correct?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay.
Does your Honor want to back up?
I kind of need it. All right. Thank you. We'll just change the number on it. All right. So it's 1247. I say, okay, 1247 in evidence. Plaintiff's 1247 in evidence, and now it can be published to the jury.
Thank you. Why don't we publish the fourth page where we're talking about? All right. So what this references is the event you said was the worst, and what you have filled in here is 3 words. IPV by Johnny, right?
Correct.
All right. And then what happened is the next box, and you've not written a single thing in the box, right?
Because I've already spent 20 some odd hours with Ms. Hurd, I know what goes in that box. If you look at the top, it says administer the life of check checklist or an other structured trauma screen. That screen had already been conducted.
Right, but there's a box on the gold standard test that asks what happened, and it says, how old were you? How were you involved? Who else was involved? Was anyone seriously injured or killed? Was anyone in life danger? And none of that information you provide in your analysis on the CAPS 5.
Your Honor, I hesitate to object, but that's very compound.
It is.
Okay, I'll sustain the objection if you want to rephrase.
We can do it
Okay.
the slow way. The first question is, how old were you?
All of the information that would go in that box is contained in my 80-plus clinical notes of my evaluation of Ms. Hurd up until this point. It would have been incredibly redundant to do that again here.
But you knew other people would review this, didn't you?
And I knew that they would have my clinical notes as well.
Oh, so they're supposed to parse through your clinical notes so that they can figure out what you chose to be the anchoring event.
I didn't choose to be the anchor. The client chooses to the anchor to identify what the worst event is for them.
You wrote IPV by Johnny. That's what you determined to be the anchoring event.
When I asked Ms. Hurd, once again, of the traumatic events that she experienced in her life, which one is the worst, this is what she indicated.
Okay. But you provided no details with respect to it.
There are plethora of details in my 80-page is a handwritten, single-spaced clinical notes.
Right. All right. Let's go to the next page. All right. You felt it appropriate to fill this page out, didn't you, Doctor?
Well, these are the questions about the symptoms, so I'm asking specific questions and getting her responses.
Didn't you know this already?
Well, I was making sure at this point, having not seen her for a year, what is the trauma expression at this time? It can change over time. It could go away. It can get better. It can get worse.
All right. Why don't we go a couple more pages in? Let's go into page 7 of 20. Now, there are a couple of boxes that you filled in on this. Let's look at item 5, B5. You don't provide any indication of what kind of reminders trigger these reactions.
She answered that on the previous questions.
All right. And you didn't provide any answer as to how long does it take to recover.
She has some difficulty recovering.
Okay. And then there's this question that says, how often has this happened in the past month? Number of times.
Correct.
And we talked about how these things are scored, and we looked at, you got to look at frequency and intensity, right?
Correct.
And you left the frequency box blank.
Well, no, if she said several times a month, then that's what the frequency is.
And you didn't fill that frequency box in at all.
Because she told me it was frequently several times a month, which is one of the anchors encoding the caps.
All right, so let's look at the next one. The very next box. Again, this is scored by frequency and intensity. How often in the past month?
Correct.
Blank.
Pardon?
How often in the past month? You left that one blank again, right?
She tells me it happens at least twice a week, so certainly I could multiply 2 times 4 and put in 8.
And you certainly could have written the number 2.
But it wasn't 2, if it's happening 2 times a week.
All right, so 2 times a week times the number of months. Now you got 2 digits instead of 1, right? That's all it took to write that down.
This is in a 1 month period, so it would have been a 4-week period.
How often in the past month? That's what it says.
Correct. You
You
said
chose
months.
not to answer that question. Let's look at the next page. Again, scoring is frequency and intensity. How often in the past month? Again, you left it blank.
If you look on the right-hand box, that is where we are indicating the frequency and the severity. If you can see where I circled moderates happening more than twice a month, that's where I am indicating the frequency of the symptom expression.
Okay. But aren't you skipping a step? You're supposed to do intensity and frequency.
And when somebody says it's happening more than twice a month, that is a frequency indicator.
All right. Let's go to the next box. Again, we have, in the past month, how many of the important parts of event have you difficulty remembering? Number of important aspects. Didn't fill it up.
Well, I listed 2 specific incidents of where she indicates she has important aspects that are missing.
But all you had to do was put a number in here. You knew how to score this thing.
Well, this measure actually doesn't get scored by the frequency.
All right, you know something, you're right. Let's look at the next one.
I know.
The next one gets scored by the frequency. That's blank, right?
Well, I did not code it as a PTSD symptom.
Okay, let's go to the next one. How much of the time in the past month have you felt that way as a percentage?
Right? So as you can see, I circled 20 to 30% of the time.
Right.
It
But you
just
didn't
isn't, I'm putting it on the right side in the box where I'm coding the instrument.
We're going to talk about the right side in a minute. You took issue with the way that Dr. Curry did this test, didn't you?
Correct.
All right. But your test, in every instance where you're asked the number of times and to fill in the blank, you leave it blank.
They're on the right side of the document.
All right. You want to talk about the right side of the document? Let's do that. After you did the CAPS 5 for the anchoring, the 3-word anchoring event, IPV by Johnny, you went back through again and said, maybe I should consider childhood trauma as well, right?
I wanted to test for the limits and see at this point in time, Ms. Heard had a child, and sometimes when people have children, their trauma gets evoked. Is she having those symptoms as well? She already had, based on this instrument, the PTSD from the interpersonal violence. I wanted to see if there were any additional symptoms.
All right. And you knew that she had had severe child abuse as a young person.
That is correct.
She grew up in a home full of heroin addicts, right?
Opiate abuse, yes.
Yeah. And there was IPV between her parents.
Correct.
All right. And so you wanted to make sure that there wasn't some impact with this childhood trauma in the diagnosis of PTSD.
Yes.
Right. And so you decided to give her the test again.
Well, I didn't give it again. What's called testing the limits. I went back to some of the questions where she answered in the affirmative and said, and is this also happening vis-a-vis your childhood abuse? Are you also having intrusive thoughts and feelings about childhood? Are you avoiding thinking about things about childhood? Is that happening for you now as well?
All right. So there are a series of notations on the right-hand side. Let's go to page 5 of 20 in the test. All right. Why don't we highlight the right-hand notations that start under the word childhood? All right. So the way you tested for childhood PTSD is to write a notation in the corner and answer a couple of questions. Same test.
Well, I wasn't administering a whole CAPS again. What I was doing was seeing, as we know with people who have what we call polyvictimization or revictimization, someone could, in fact, meet criteria for the PTSD from the domestic violence, but then they're also experiencing some symptoms as a result of the childhood abuse. Both can occur.
Right. But Mr. Depp isn't responsible for her childhood abuse.
That is correct.
Right. And the way you tested this childhood abuse PTSD is you made notations on the in the right-hand column of a form that you partially filled out for the IPV by Johnny, right?
Well, I disagree with the partially filled out. The frequency was clearly filled out in the box where we score the CAPS. But yes, I did write about the childhood to the right of that box.
Okay. And that is the appropriate way that the gold standard test for PTSD for childhood trauma should be administered.
If there were any affirmatives and I needed to go further, I could have administered another CAPS 5. There were not. I did not need to do that.
Okay. So you chose not to do a second CAPS 5, although you knew that she had suffered from severe childhood trauma.
No, because she wasn't suffering symptoms at that point in time, PTSD symptoms from the childhood trauma.
All right.
Mr. Dennison, are you moving to a different topic now?
I am.
Okay, all right, this might be a great time to take our morning break then. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our 15-minute break. Please do not discuss this case with anybody. Don't do any outside research, okay? Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and take,
Your Honor, before
Yes.
we take the break.
Yes.
May I get a copy of the new exhibits from them so that I can see it over the break?
I don't know if we can do it before, but we'll certainly get them to you.
Well, I mean, I need to be able to redirect, and I have never seen these.
okay, well, we'll go through it. That's fine, all right?
Although it's in your exhibit
So
list.
that's
Well,
fine.
if it's in my exhibit list, if they just tell me.
To tell you the
that's
exhibit
fine.
numbers, that's fine. We'll work through it, okay? Let's take a recess of 11:40 then, okay?
Thank you,
All right,
Your
back
Honor.
at 11:40.